Creative Tech Podcast. Hi, I'm Kaori Ray, product designer and author. Our mission is to help people in their career and lives by sharing their creative and technology stories. Today's episode, Maajid Part 2. So we talked about the reason why some Japanese big tech company couldn't succeed in the US market. Let's get started. Okay, next question.
Okay.
Yeah, tell us about your observation. So many Japanese startups, they want to expand the US, right? They want to go to Silicon Valley, like your hometown, kind of, San Francisco.
Maybe not my hometown, but yeah, sure. Yeah.
But it's difficult. So do you know how many Japanese startups they could succeed in San Francisco? Not many, right? So tell us about your observation. Why it's difficult for Japanese startups?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question because I wonder, I'm not aware of too many companies, but maybe do you know any software companies that originated in Japan that have been successful, let's say, outside Japan recently?
I don't know it's super successful, but for example, Mercari and Rakuten, they tried to success in US, but I don't know it's still working or not.
Yeah. And same, I kind of struggled to come up with good examples of Japanese companies that succeeded outside of Japan. I mean, for a while, maybe even the opposite was also true, like kind of companies that were originally successful outside Japan, how many of them have been successful in Japan? But I think it's easier to think of those examples now because there's very big global companies, right? If we kind of don't consider just software, like there are some Japanese companies that are very well globally known, right? Like, for example, Nintendo is a very famous example, or Sony, or even Toyota, right? There are some Japanese companies that are very well known, and they are among the biggest companies in the whole world, right? Take Toyota for example. I think its international sales are much bigger than its domestic sales nowadays, and there is likely to be some reasons for that. But when it comes to pure software companies, especially startups, I think, Japan has kind of struggled in this sense, right? So maybe using the two examples that you mentioned, like Mercari and Rakuten. Like Rakuten, I remember, did a lot of kind of marketing. Like they used to be, maybe they still are, they're like a big sports sponsor in the US, right? Like they sponsor the Golden State Warriors, from what I remember, right? And they were like on their jerseys and everything. But I feel like the average person in the US has no idea what Rakuten is or what Rakuten does. And as far as I'm aware, nobody uses Rakuten in the US, right? Like there's already platforms like eBay or Amazon where you can do, e-commerce. And the funny thing is that's kind of the same thing for Mercari, right? Mercari and Rakuten, they're both kind of e-commerce sites. Like there's differences in how they operate and stuff, but their main product is they're both like marketplaces. And same thing with Mercari in that, like Mercari tried to launch in the UK, it didn't launch in the US as well, and they encountered a lot of different problems, right? So with Mercari, I think we had briefly discussed this before a little bit. Like my hypothesis had been kind of related a little bit to the fact that it's already a very established market in the US. Like Amazon already has like cornered a lot of the same market that, both Mercari and Rakuten kind of look at. But with logistics in Japan, I feel like there's companies like Sagawa and Yamato, Kuroneko, where there are delivery companies in Japan where you can get kind of things delivered straight to your door within like a 2-hour window, and it's very safe. If you require a signature, then you can ask for a signature. They're always on, like pretty much always on time, and they almost never lose packages, right? And the customer service here across all industries is really, really good. And Sagawa and like these kind of delivery companies are like, there's no exception, right? Like they do a very, very good job in delivering those packages. Now, what's funny is that if you look at like Amazon in Japan, I feel like Amazon Prime, one of the main benefits of Prime for a long time was like the 2-day delivery in the US. Here, 2-day delivery is like, it's slow, no? Like, I don't need that. Like, why would I pay for Prime to get 2-day delivery? And for like, I feel like the longest time, Amazon Prime didn't have enough value for Japanese consumers, right? And Mercari and Rakuten, I feel, are like built on top of some of this excellent logistics infrastructure that already exists in Japan. And when they go outside of Japan, they suddenly start facing logistics challenges that they don't face in their domestic market, right? So, like, if you want to deliver a package in the US, you have to deal with much higher kind of fraud rates, right? Of people like straight up stealing packages that are left on your doorstep, for example. You know, there's lots of kind of videos on the internet where people post kind of home security videos of, you know, like UPS drivers and things like just tossing packages, right? For example. So even the customer service is a little bit bad, I would say, in the US compared to Japan. Right?
Totally different.
yeah, totally different. And not to mention, right, like in the US, you can do chargebacks on credit cards and stuff like that. And so I think credit card fraud is also higher.
Yes.
All right. But anyway, like, you know, there's so many also like other potential reasons. But I think that, you know, some of these kind of touch maybe a little bit on why Mercari and Rakuten in particular were not successful. But with other, you know, software companies, I feel it's just the domestic market is so different from launching a product in English. If you don't have like kind of a team to understand sort of what it takes to launch a product globally, and if the Japanese market is already big enough for that business to succeed, there's almost like no reason for them to try and go and build something globally, because if they're already successful in, you know, quite a large economy, like locally, domestically, and that's also already kind of hard enough, there's maybe no reason for them to create a global product, maybe, right? Like that's, yeah, I'm not sure if I necessarily have any answers there, but that's kind of one of my thoughts, right?
I see. So basically, like kind of, it's difficult to find appropriate correct market. This part, yeah. And in the US, there are already many competitors.
Yeah, I think the kind of cost of starting a new business in the US is not as high as it is in Japan. I think, like you said, partly there's that social kind of, you know, people don't want to do something that's not stable in Japan in general, right? And starting a business is considered to be a very risky endeavor. But if you do start a business in Japan, I feel like you are potentially more likely to succeed than in the US if you kind of get past those initial hurdles. Where in the US, I feel like it's a lot of things are a little bit easier. Like you can kind of incorporate a company, you know, from the comfort of your home, like completely online nowadays, right?
Yeah.
Where I think in Japan, maybe you still have to go to the ward office and stamp some hanko on some papers and, you know, like do some things. But, you know, there, not to say that that's necessarily bad, right? Like you have to really think about before, like, you know, is this really the appropriate thing before you build a company? But yeah.
I see. Okay. Yeah, you are right. Next question. Why did you come to Japan? And I knew you are already a good Japanese speaker. But
maybe that's actually, I've been trying to improve my Japanese lately because I want to work more with Japanese companies and Japanese clients, and I feel like my business Japanese is still not very good. Not good at all, actually. I don't really know business Japanese. But yeah, thank you for saying that. I came almost 7 years ago now, which feels like a very long time. But yeah. And I guess Corona also kind of made time feel very different, right? Like it feels like a whole bunch of time was kind of just lost, and you know, it's been interesting. I mean, I think it was good to be in Japan during that time, because it was kind of maybe one of the safer places, at least in terms of you know, not being exposed to kind of the bad effects of Corona and stuff like that. But the entire world kind of went through a big shift during that time period, right? So yeah, I came to Japan 7 years ago because I wanted to kind of change how I approached my own life. Like I wanted to become a little bit more, not an extroverted person, but I wanted to take certain challenges. And one of them being like eventually, I wanted to start a company, and I eventually kind of wanted to switch into product management, for example. And for me, I needed to put myself in a personal situation where I felt like just kind of, I thought that putting myself in a radically different environment would be a good catalyst for change, as in it would help me kind of push myself even more and push me out of my comfort zone. And I also had this kind of idea in the back of my head that if I can communicate with people across the world in a different language, in a completely different culture, with different norms, and that I would question my own assumptions and really start to think differently. And so far, I'm really glad that I made that leap, because I have, I think, grown very much as a person, like in the 7 years that I've been here. And I think overall, it's been incredibly positive, and I really enjoy living here, and that's why I kind of intend to continue living here. And for people who are interested in coming to Japan, whether it's just visiting or actually thinking about moving here, I also eventually at some point want to be able to kind of give them an insight into what it is like to live here and work here and all of that kind of stuff. All right.
So the first, when you moved to Japan, thanks to Google, changed to the position in same company.
Yeah, that's right. I was pretty lucky. So the way I moved was that I was in pretty good standing at the time. Like I was working at Google as a software engineer. I had been there for, I think, pretty much almost 2 years. And at that point, I went through a process where I was lucky enough to get promoted. Like I had, for those people who know about how Google's promotion process works, like you kind of have to self-nominate for a promotion, and then you have to kind of show that you're working at the next level and all this stuff. I mean, it might have changed a little bit in the time since I quit, but that was essentially the gist of how it worked back, 7 years ago or 5 years ago. Yeah. And so at the time I was in a specialist role, like it was a subset of software engineering. It was like software engineering and tools and infrastructure, a test originally, actually. That role, I don't think it exists anymore, but in the process, I took the more generic software engineering role, and there was a quirk that, like, the manager that I had at the time, like, he was no longer allowed to manage me because he had that specialist role and he could only manage those specialists. So I needed to find a new team, basically, and I used that as an excuse to go and talk to HR and say, like, hey, if I need to look for a new team, can I look for a new team anywhere? And, one thing kind of led to the other, and it led me to researching all sorts of global Google offices, right? And I found that, like in the process of searching, I was like considering, like, what about salary? What about career trajectory? What about, like, personal life in terms of living somewhere? Is it sufficiently different from the US? Like, am I going to feel sort of challenged and things like that? Japan turned out to be kind of a nice fit because, like, salary was higher than a lot of other places. Like, it was higher than London, for example. Like, London's salaries for like Google offices, like, they were pretty bad. And also, speak English in London, and it didn't feel like a big enough change. Switzerland, the salaries were really good in Switzerland, but I had been there like 10 times and I didn't feel like I was going to learn enough by going to Switzerland. Then there were a few other places that I considered, like Korea and Taiwan. In Korea, there weren't enough software engineering opportunities and the salary was too low. And then same thing kind of in Taiwan, like it was very specific teams and the salary was really, really low. So Japan kind of was different enough. It was like similar to Korea and Taiwan. This is really different, but it had a better salary than, like, those places. So
Thank you so much for sharing super, like, specific and internal information.
Yeah, it was very specific.
Oh.
I tend to think and plan a lot when I make big life decisions, so it was a big process.
Good. Okay, last question, March. So tell us about your dream in 5 years and 10 years, whatever.
Oof, that's a hard one. Yeah, it's a good question. I feel like, there's always that sort of, normal personal life stuff of like, oh, I want to, get married and, have a house and like, travel and all this kind of stuff. That's of course like, all stuff that I want to do. But in 5 years, I would say, at least from a work standpoint, like the biggest thing that I want to be able to do is have either like, be running my own company or, currently within InnoHyve, like be co-founder for a company that is kind of very, very focused on, giving back to Japan and kind of growing as well, right? In terms of 10 years, I think that doesn't really change too much, maybe. Right? It's more of the same, but I hope to be like even a little bit further along in that journey, right? And thinking about ways that I can stop working as well, because for a long time I had actually kind of considered, okay, what would it take for me to not have to work by like the age of like 35 or so, right? Kind of rapidly getting to that point. And I do feel fortunate enough that I don't think I have to work like really, really hard just to enjoy life, right? I work because I like to work, and I'm very privileged in being able to do that. But anything could happen, right? Like I think we're all to some degree kind of privileged to have our health and be able to kind of I feel fortunate, right? Like I feel very, very fortunate for the life that I have. And you never know, life is kind of short.
Yes.
Who knows? Will we all be here in 10 years? I don't know, but I hope to be, and I hope to be enjoying life as much as I am now, or if not more, right? So that's the
Right.
hope.
I see. Okay, and then you guys have many events recently. Let's say our audience want to join your event, so we had better to check your company's LinkedIn.
Yes,
you are
right.
LinkedIn too.
Yes, so check our company's LinkedIn, follow it, please. And yeah, you can also check my LinkedIn or follow me on LinkedIn. We also have a Meetup account, and that's probably where we're going to be posting most events moving forward. We use a couple other platforms as well, but I think Meetup is the one that we're kind of preferring now. So you can find us on Meetup if you search InnoHyve on Meetup. And I think probably Kaori will put the links in the description as well, right? So, yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much for your amazing story today, Marge.
Thanks for having me. I hope the wind interview is not too bad. It looks like you're enjoying your time outside.
Yeah, so let's keep in touch. We can collaborate again.
For sure. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you so much for listening our Creative Tech podcast today. We hope our story to help your career and life. See you soon. Bye bye.